Today we're going to be talking about some major changes that happened in the early republic. Last time we saw the first party system that emerged. We saw Federalist versus not anti-Federalist anymore, but those Democratic Republicans or Jeffersonian Republicans. We saw that because of the Alien and Sedition Acts that the Federalists passed in the late 1700s that undermined free speech, free press. Jefferson himself and the party of Democratic Republicans rose and they won that election in 1800, which was really a sea change in American politics. We see for the first time a completely different political group or party that had very different views about what the nation should be and where the nation should go, won the election over the party that was in office, and that there was that peaceful transition of power that happened. So now as we move forward, we're really going to see some major changes that happen under Jefferson and then the presidents that come after him, the next two of which after him will be from Virginia as well. So if you'll remember, the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans had very different views on things. The Federalists was the party of Hamilton, of Adams, of George Washington. They wanted that strong central banking system. They wanted a protective tariff that will give primacy to American production. They wanted a powerful navy to defend our shipping on the seas. They wanted to really focus on the wealthy businessmen of the northeastern coast. They wanted a loose interpretation of the Constitution. So if the Constitution didn't give the federal government the ability to do something, or if it didn't say it couldn't do it, then it was implied that maybe it can. It could be a loose interpretation as long as it didn't prohibit it. On the other hand, the Democratic Republicans, the party of Jefferson, Madison, Monroe, will argue for a weak central government. They are essentially skeptical of the Federalist project of having that overarching strong constitution that could subdue the states and in their minds probably overstep the rights of the people, which we actually saw the Federalists do with the Alien and Sedition Acts. They're going to want to focus on state banks and not have a national bank. They're going to want to scale down the Navy, anything that could be a strong military presence that could be used potentially to undermine the freedoms of the people. And they're really going to focus on craftsmen, artists, that really agriculture, right, is their central piece. They think that the future of the nation should be independent farmers that are essentially free from tyrannical, strong government. From 1801 to 1825, we have three successive Virginia presidents: Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, and James Monroe. Historians often talk about this as the Virginia dynasty. And so this is an interesting sequence of events because the Jeffersonian Republicans, the Democratic Republicans, very quickly in some people's minds, it begins to look almost monarchical in the way that Virginia continues to lead. They're not obviously related by blood, but it does look like a secession. So the word Virginia dynasty often gets used to describe that succession of three presidents from Virginia in a row. The word dynasty might point to some potential tensions or contradictions within the Jeffersonian or Democratic Republican government that comes after the Federalists, but there are much deeper contradictions. We talked previously about how Jefferson himself embodies a contradiction, where he has this agricultural idea that he associates with virtue and freedom, while simultaneously building that on the back of racial slavery. But Jefferson's contradictions go much deeper than this. Remember that Jefferson was very outspoken against the Hamilton Project of focusing on international trade, on the centrality of banking, the buildup of the Navy. He really began to symbolize in the American mind small government, that's what preserves liberty for the American people better than a large federal government. He campaigned and he pushed on undoing the Hamiltonian Project. And he wanted to completely undo that Hamilton Project until he didn't. Once Jefferson got in office, he realized that he was going to have to expand the American landscape in order to create his empire of liberty of independent farmers. In 1803, when he got the ability to buy a large swath of land, double the size of what the United States was, from France, he jumped on this opportunity. And the problem was that the Constitution didn't exactly lay forth a roadmap or a legal ability for the United States to buy large swaths of land from other countries. So what Jefferson did is he began to appeal to a looser interpretation of what the Constitution says. And he says, well, since the Constitution allows the federal government to make treaties between other nations, we can make a treaty with France in order to pull this large swath of land in instead of directly buying it from them. And this is exactly what happened. This is one of the clearest examples of the contradictions of Jefferson's presidency, not just in the fact that he was willing to bend his political ideas and expand his power in order to do something that wasn't clearly enumerated in the Constitution, but it also opened up a world of disagreement. And if you remember that contradiction in Jefferson of the person who wrote the Declaration of Independence, all men are created equal, while simultaneously perpetuating racial slavery in his own home and nationally, Louisiana Purchase and what happens to that land as we begin to move forward shows how those contradictions are present, and it broadcasts them on a national stage, eventually spiraling us closer to civil war. Where that really begins to happen, there's another event that's of major significance. So in 1812, we end up going to war with England again. This is an ongoing skirmish we're having between France and England. If you remember, we almost got pulled into a war with France. When we make agreements with England, then we get pulled in with France. When we make agreements with France, we get pulled in with England. This is ongoing tension that's happening with these powers that Jefferson really was originally wanting to stay out of. Under the administration of the Democratic Republicans, things become very tense with England again. If you remember, the Federalists wanted to establish relationships with England. Democratic Republicans were weary of a relationship with England, that could become tense or tyrannical or bring us back into old world ways of thinking. What's significant about this is the War of 1812 will mark the decline of the Federalist Party. Many Jeffersonian Republicans will be an advocate of a fierce foreign policy against Britain. Many of the Democratic or Jeffersonian Republicans think that there should be an aggressive policy against British. They think that we should, once and for all, purge the British from the New World and be done with the whole thing. On the other hand, the Federalists don't agree with this. They think that we should establish long-lasting trade relations and a good relationship with England. This is going to really continue to divide both of these parties. In the War of 1812, when we begin to battle England in what some historians refer to as the Second American Revolution, this continues to divide both of the parties. What really gets the Federalists in trouble is during the war, they have this Hartford Convention where many Federalists come together and they say, look, we're alienated England, we're going to war, this is the wrong direction for the country, and if things continue to go on in this way, it might be better for the Federalists to pull away. They border on the idea that it would be better for the Federalists to secede from the Union or to pull away from the United States. You can see how this is seen by many as perhaps treasonous or, at best case, unpatriotic. And so in the minds of many Americans who are really galvanized by the patriotism and the idea that we should push off the old tyrannical oversight once and for all, this is seen as too far. And so after the War of 1812, we don't really see any kind of powerful Federalist Party. There's really only the Democratic Republicans that have any ongoing significance. The major significance of the War of 1812 then is that after the war, there is really only one significant party, and that is the Democratic Republicans. After the War of 1812, from the 18 teens all the way through the late 20s into the 1830s, there's only one political party. So historians often refer to this period where the Federalists are essentially of no power anymore as the era of good feelings, because there's only one political party. There's not the Federalists versus the Democratic Republicans anymore. There are only the Democratic Republican or Jefferson Republicans. After the War of 1812, Americans are again able to focus on domestic issues, and it really becomes central what's going to happen for this huge swath of land that Jefferson brought into the Union. So if you think about the Louisiana Purchase, that huge triangle that doubled the size of America, very quickly the question becomes, is this territory going to be cut up into states? And obviously, as we saw with the Northwest Ordinance, that is the presupposition. Territories will eventually be cut up into states. The question is when this territory gets cut up into states, are those states going to be free states or are they going to be slave states? Now, we saw under the Northwest Ordinance, remember that Northwest territory that will end up becoming Ohio, Indiana, Michigan, that was, right from the beginning, they said this is going to be free soil, and it gave that roadmap to statehood. Now, extended into the Louisiana Purchase very quickly, the question is which one are these going to be? Jefferson wasn't president anymore, but he understood the seriousness of this, even though he helped perpetuate this tension through his presidency and policies. What happens here is there is a major compromise barter, drafted by the Kentucky Congressman Henry Clay. The Compromise of 1820, also known as the Missouri Compromise, will essentially come to a tense decision about what states will be free, what states will be slave. The stipulations of the Compromise of 1820, or the Missouri Compromise, are that Missouri will come in 1820 as a slave state, and Maine, up in the Northeast, will come in as a free state. The idea here is that they're kicking the can down the road. They're letting future generations have to decide what eventually will happen with slavery, what national policy will happen. So for the now, we'll have a slave state come in and a free state. The idea is that each of those states will get representation in Congress. They'll get senators, they'll get representatives in the House of Representatives. Therefore, they'll have congressional representation that is essentially going to balance the slave versus free power for another generation. And then it will also put in that 3630 parallel that says anything above 3630 will be free. So the implication here is that whatever states, and if we look at the map, eventually states will come in. We know that Kansas, Nebraska, Dakotas, we have these, many states that will eventually come in. They don't foresee that at the time, but they're saying that any state above this latitude will come in, will be a free state. Anything that is below, we see that Arkansas territory, anything that's below that line, 3630 below Missouri, will come in as a slave state. Now, Jefferson understood how serious this was. He very famously wrote a quote as an old man. He's out of office by now, but he wrote, "A geographical line coinciding with a marked principle, moral and political, once conceived and held up to the angry passions of men, will never be obliterated, and every new iteration will spark it deeper and deeper." He goes even further and says, "But this momentous question, like a fireball in the night, awakened me and filled me with terror. I considered it the death knell of the Union." And as we go forward and we begin to make an argument of the centrality of racial slavery to the beginning of the Civil War, this Compromise of 1820 and Jefferson's reflections on it help us understand how this is a stake in that ground in that argument. So if we think about the Northwest Ordinance drawing that line up into what will become Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, saying that's going to be free. Now we have this 3630 that says anything above that's going to be free and anything below is going to be a slave state. We can see the centrality of this issue of racial slavery to it. So our argument here is that as we begin to move towards division in the country, it is not so much slavery in the South that becomes the question, but it is what is these territories? What are these new states going to be as they begin to come in? And already in 1820, that is beginning to divide the nation.